motion goes, you don't actually know the wind is blowing unless you feel it or unless you see the trees moving. So the wind itself you can't see. Ether is the same way, the spaciousness. It's just so subtle you can't really experience it. Fire gets a little bit more dense, but again, like within our bodies, it's the enzymatic process that tends to break things down within our bodies. And so it's more of the process itself that you see. You only see the enzymes because fire is working with water in order to create those enzymes. And so all three of these are very subtle processes. And so let's see, where were we? Heavier light.
Stable or mobile. Oh.
And stable or mobile? Mobile. That's another one of those that's kind of tricky. It's not necessarily mobile, but it's neither stable, and so sometimes I'll use unstable, but it's a hard categorization for fire. So let's look at water. And again, it's not so much water, it's more of this quality of fluidity, and sometimes it's also associated with the cohesion, so the quality of drawing things together. That's why water often has to do with emotions. So is it hot or cold?
Cold.
Cold. Yeah. And is it dry or moist? Moist. And that's its main quality. Heavy or light?
Heavy.
It's heavy. And stable or mobile?
Mobile.
It is more mobile. It doesn't move by itself, but it is able to move. And so we'll end with earth then, and earth again is that's this idea of solidity. It's not like the actual soil or dirt beneath our feet. So everything that we can see or can touch has that solid quality to it. And everything is a combination of all of these different elements, but one of them often predominates. So you're looking for that element that predominates. So is earth hot or cold?
Cold.
And it's cold. Is it dry or moist?
Moist. Dry.
It's dry. And water is pretty much the only one that has moisture by itself. And so again, you look at earth as this quality of solidity. So there might be a little bit of moisture in this wall, but this wall is very solid. So it by itself does not, it's not inherent that we could tell that there's actually moisture in there, because it's just that quality of solidity. And again, it's where we get in trouble is we think of like the actual earth beneath our feet, which has water in it, which makes it moist. So heavy or light? Heavy. That's its main quality. And stable or mobile? It's very stable. So any questions?
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it says seeds of divinity, and I'm thinking about ether and connectedness, and that's like the closest thing to like the God, that is in everything or whatever. And then I think about like all these different gods and goddesses. Just where, like, is maybe a question I could ask you after too, because it might not be very useful for what we're doing right now. But I'm just curious, like, what's the divine? Is it just that we all are? What's the whole philosophy?
Well, like the Sankhya. So this is based on Sankhya philosophy, and the nutshell is that there are two. It's kind of like the yin and yang. There's Purusha and Prakriti. An entire universe comes out of Purusha and Prakriti, and Purusha is the idea. It's the unmanifest form. It's like pure consciousness. It exists, and you know that it exists. It's like the thought in your mind. Like you have the thought, but nothing else happens. And so that's Purusha. And Prakriti is basically everything else. And sometimes they differentiate them into masculine and feminine, saying that this kind of consciousness, unmanifest, is more masculine, and then the feminine is more, the Prakriti is more feminine, because it's what creates everything else, basically. So it's got that mothering quality where it then creates everything else. So then you have that, and you have Prakriti creating everything else, and then it goes into these three kind of dominant qualities of sattva, rajas, and tamas. And let's see, I might have those written here. Let's look real quick. Let's see.
We use those in polarity, yeah? Those
Right.
concepts.
We use those three qualities in polarity. So those are called the three gunas. And so that's the first differentiation of Prakriti that happens, is they differentiate into these three qualities. And these everything that we see in our universe has kind of one of these three qualities. I'll use a couple examples to kind of explain them briefly. The example I use most often is that of a lake. And so if you have a still lake and you have the full moon above it and a clear sky above it, and the lake is completely still, then you can see easily the pure reflection of the moon in the sky. So if there's any, say you throw a pebble into the lake and ripples start to form on the lake, those ripples are often associated with the thoughts, because we're coming from, the idea to the creative potential, and so this is the most subtle realm, and that's why the kind of sattva, rajas, and tamas is often used in Ayurvedic psychology, but it's a very subtle realm, so it's very difficult for us to kind of tune into in a certain regard. So you throw the pebble into the lake, and you get the ripples on the pond, and so there's this agitation on the pond. So you can still see the moon, you can still see divinity, you can still have access to Prakriti, but it's not clear because there's these ripples, there's this agitation, there's this, there's something kind of obscuring that to a certain extent. So that's rajas, it's this very active mind. And that's what our culture promotes. It promotes a rajasic state of mind. It says that a rajasic state of mind is the best state of mind to be in. And then on the other side of that is tamas. And so tamas is if you take a huge stir stick and you stick it into the lake and you start to stir the bottom of the lake around until all the water becomes muddy. So at that point you can no longer see the reflection of the moon because all the water in the lake is completely muddy. And that's tamas, is this kind of like ignorance that manifests. Interesting thing that you find is that tamas looks a lot like sattva, because rajas is the only time where there's actually any sort of movement and activity taking place. And so it's easy to identify when somebody's mind is really spinning. But let's say you're in meditation, it's very difficult to differentiate for whether you're actually in tamas or whether you're in sattva. If your concentration is pure and clear, and you actually have a clear understanding or a clear vision of that moon above, or if you're just, spacing out and just like doing the mud and the pond thing. They look very similar because there is no activity in either one of those states. But again, because they're such subtle states, it's hard to differentiate. So then you have sattva, rajas, and tamas, and then those come down, and they come down into mahat, which is cosmic intelligence, and then ahamkara, which is the ego. And then the ego, the I-ness, they say the way I remember it is ahamkara, is I am my car, I am my vehicle. It's the concept that we have that we are this body, that we act, this is actually all we are. And so that then differentiates into the five elements. And so they go into the five elements, and so you go the five elements, and then each of those five elements are connected with a different sense organ and with a different sense. So, for example, if I go back to this five element chart here, let's see if I can find that again. And you look at ether. So ether is connected to hearing, and so it's connected to sound. And so first there's the sound, and then there's the element of ether, and then there's the actual hearing, and then there's the ear. And so there's all these different differentiations of ahamkara. And so ahamkara is deeply linked to our sense organs. And then you have air, and air is touch. And then, so it's often associated with the hands because it's touch. And then you have fire, which is seeing. And so the sense organ would then be the eyes. And then you have water, which is smelling. So the sense organ is the nose. And then you have earth, which is tasting. So the sense organ is the tongue. And it also goes into organs of action as well. So what, which are different than the actual sense organs. And so that's kind of the Ayurvedic cosmology, so to speak. That's the philosophy that it's based off of.
It's based in Chinese, right?
Not at all. No. So it's based on Sankhya philosophy, which is...
She said space, not based. She's
No, it's based. So
Based?
I thought it was based.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So the Chinese took it from.
It depends on who you talk to.
Yeah.
It happened at the same time.
It happened about the same time, and there's differences. But yeah, in general, an Ayurvedic person will tell you that through Buddhism, Ayurveda ended up in China and became traditional Chinese medicine. Because Buddhism originated in India, and that's where Ayurveda was. And most of China became Buddhist.
Okay.
But Confucius was around the same time.
Right. So, and I'm sure a Chinese person would argue their point, and I don't know.
They've both been around about 6,000 years.
Yeah, they've both been around for a long time. Yeah.
Could you tell me the name of the unmanifested again? Is it Purusha or
Purusha. So
Purusha.
Purusha.
Thank you.
And it's probably in one of his books. You can hand that around. if you want.
Okay.
16.
So that's the Ayurvedic cosmology. And then at this point in the class, I usually have people fill out their little questionnaire so you can determine what your constitution and imbalance is. But I'll just go ahead and kind of go into the doshas briefly, and then we'll explore them more in depth in a second. So when you take those 5 elements, and a lot of these elements are very different from each other, but they agree to collaborate with one another in order to create the human body. And so the doshas are very specific to the human body. You can see them everywhere, but the word itself, dosha, actually means to spoil, which is a very strange thing, because in the West we like to identify things. Like you learn what your dosha is, and you want to say, I'm a vata pitta, or I'm a kapha, or whatever it is that you are. We really like to identify with things. But from the Ayurvedic perspective, that's not helpful for us to identify with that. We need the doshas because we need to see how that collaboration is happening between those separate elements in order to allow our body to function and to act, and to have that ability to predict how these things that we're taking, how the things that are outside of us, when we take them into ourselves, how they're going to affect our bodies. But in general, it's considered unhelpful to identify with your dosha. So I introduced this in one of the classes last time, and this is my favorite kind of diagram for explaining the different doshas. And basically what happens is vata is made of space and air. And so those two things, which are very separate, you have expansiveness and you have motion, they agree to collaborate within the body and to create vata. And then for Pitta, you have fire and water, two things that are very different from each other, agreeing to collaborate to create